Alright, let me get this straight. You are a skilled assassin, and you're meant to kill your target as discreet and as stealthy as possible. But you wear this amongst people that do not wear the same outfit. How does that make sense? I'll get to my gripes with this game in a moment, but first, hey guys, David here, talking about a new video game, and this time I'll be talking about Assassin's Creed. The first installment in the everlasting franchise that started it all, and it's now the new elegant and classy Call of Duty. Because now it seems like we're getting one every year. It's mandatory to get a new Assassin's Creed and a new Call of Duty every single year and just milk this cow dry. But first, let's talk about where it all started. Assassin's Creed follows the tale of Altair, or Altair, however you pronounce his name. A skilled assassin who's a member of something called the Brotherhood, who is in charge of assassinating vital targets to maintain peace and order to the kingdom. On the one hand, you have the story of Altair and him hunting down his targets and trying to uncover the truth behind some of the conspiracy that's going on within the kingdoms of the Middle East, like Jerusalem and Damascus. And on the other hand, you have Desmond Miles, a 20-something nobody that gets taken hostage by a company named Abstergo for some mysterious reason. The game's narrative flip-flops back and forth between these two characters. And at first, I thought that it was a little bit unbalanced. I thought that, for some strange reason, I think I'm in the minority who enjoyed Desmond's story a little more towards the beginning rather than Altair's. Altair's is very melodramatic. It's very much about, give me names and I'll give you blood. Very, Shakespearean. But with the touch of the setting that this game is taking place. This game takes place somewhere along maybe the 13th or 14th century. And like I said, it takes place in the Middle East with cities like Jerusalem and Damascus. And this is one of the things that I commend the game, is the fact that it looks like that time period. The art direction in this game is beautiful, and the graphics still hold up even 6 years later. This game came out in 2007, and every now and then there's a little, graphic element like a rock on the ground or a tree that looks a little dated, but some of the vistas, some of the, like I said, the art direction and the buildings and the landscape and the architecture still holds up to this day. Character models are really great, and the game still runs pretty well. Minor some tiny little hiccups here and there, some texture popping, some frame rate issues, but they're very scarce, and overall the game holds up very well in its presentation. The one thing that I can get kind of picky about is some of the voice talent. Half of it is actually pretty good. I like the voice talent, especially that of Desmond Miles. I thought his the guy who played him was really cool. It was really sarcastic and witty. And again, the majority of the voice casting is very good. But every now and then, on the side of Altair and in the setting of Middle Eastern, 13th or 14th century Middle East, there were moments where an extra, quote unquote, their voice, the voice work was quite terrible. There's every now and then you'll encounter a woman who's being messed around with by some of the corrupt guards. And she would say, "Help me! Somebody help me!" It literally sounded just like that. I was like, man, that's terrible. And speaking of some mediocre elements here and there, going back to the graphics, there were certain points where the animation was just a tiny bit wonky, and again, a little dated. Since this came out back in 2007, you could kind of tell that they were still polishing on some of that, next generation engines. Like, there's certain moments in Desmond's story in which there's this character named Lucy, and every now and then when she talked, her head would kind of wonk a little bit. And I thought that maybe they would have spaced out a little bit of the dialogue. There's certain scenes where the dialogue is so snappy that it kind of overlaps one another. One person would talk, and immediately, right after they were done with their line, another character would talk, and I'm like, dude, I mean, I understand that they're going for this very dynamic way of conversation and dialogue delivery, but there's certain moments where I felt like a space in between characters' interactions would have suited the story a little bit better. But I'm nitpicking at this point, and like I said, it happens every so often. Like I said before, I felt a little more connected with Desmond's story more than I was with Altair towards the beginning, but I'm happy to say that as the game proceeds during its 14 or 15 hour campaign, the two stories start to interweave very well. And Altair's story becomes way more intriguing than it was at the beginning, and both manage to balance out very well, and both build up to its resounding climax very well. Now, here is the little thing. I'm going to try not to indulge myself into too many spoilers, but the game kind of cuts off. It is the definition of a cliffhanger. And people who played this back in 2007, I imagine they were very edgy. At least I felt edgy when the credits started rolling, and I was just like, wait, that's it? But fortunately, I live now in 2013, and I know for a fact that there's literally 4 other sequels that came after this game. So I know that the story, at least Desmond's story, continues. As for Altair, I don't know what's gonna happen. I believe Altair's story has in fact wrapped up, and our new protagonist in the Anubis is gonna be Ezio. And speaking from, I'm gonna go ahead and pretend that I'm back in 2007. I'm playing the game for the first time during its cycle, during its first year of release, and seeing how the game ends would have had my jaw drop to the floor. But the fact that I live in 2013 and I know the fact that there is 4 other sequels out now, I'm not too shocked. You know, I know that there's a continuing story, but I think that people who played this back in 2007 would have been a little jarred by that ending. And I myself felt jarred, even though I know the fact that there's these other sequels. And I felt like there should have been some sort of resolution with that story, with both Desmond and Altair's story, because that's the thing, there is no resolution. And, you know, if they wanted to keep the story going, they could build a resolution that says, but there's more, but the game literally cuts off. And I felt that that's jumping the shark a little bit, you know, especially if, I mean, obviously we know that there's sequels now, but what if there weren't going to be a sequel? What if Ubisoft didn't have any sort of funding? If I was playing this back in 2007, I wouldn't have known that, and I would have gotten pissed if there was no Assassin's Creed 2. However, the game's pace in terms of its story is really good, and despite the fact that, like I said, it kind of cuts off, I would say what we get beforehand is very intriguing and a very captivating story. And in the sense of this being the first game, it's a very original one. Alright, now let's talk gameplay. How does this game play? Well, I can tell you one thing. In terms of Desmond's story, all you do is walk around, maybe access the computer a little bit. It's very story driven when it comes to Desmond's story. Now, Altair's story, that's a whole different story. You start off by being a really skilled assassin, and you have this full health bar, you got all these abilities, but something happens in the story that completely strips you away of all of that, and you have to, you know, build it back up as the story progresses. And you progress the story by assassinating the targets that are assigned to you. When you assassinate your targets, you jump out of Altair's story and into Desmond's story. When you progress in Desmond's story, you progress more in Altair's story, and you jump back into Altair's story. And when you begin Altair's new, story session, you gain a new, more experience for your sword play. You get a new weapon. You get more health in your health bar. And that's one of the things that kind of works against the game, is the fact that there's a point about maybe a third into the game that it gets a little repetitive. Investigate about your target, find, eavesdrop on somebody's conversation, pickpocket somebody, do this 2 or 3 times. Boom, you get your information on your target. You talk to this one guy. He tells you that, oh yeah, that's definitely the target. Then your target is marked on your map. You go kill him, rinse and repeat. Now, granted, in classic video game fashion, it gets harder and harder. There's these new obstacles. One of my worst pet peeves, one of the worst things that this game throws at you are these, sick, demented people that push you every now and then, and you got also these beggars that are bugging the living shit out of you. Which leads me to another element, another aesthetic that this game has, is the fact that you are a skilled assassin and you're supposed to be stealthy and discreet, and that's the way of the Assassin's Creed. So you are given the option to play this game as a stealthy assassin by merely just walking the streets. You're not running. And this game is super hyper realistic when it comes to discrepancy and stealth. Meaning that obviously if you run really fast, and the guards are going to notice this and be suspicious of you, and if they're suspicious long enough, you're going to get caught. And by caught, I mean they're going to try to kill you, and this is where you can take the 180 route and decide to not be stealthy, not be discreet, and kill these guys in cold blood. And you're given that option. It's just that there's certain moments, not all the time, there's times where you can kill all the guys and be able to get out of the situation that you're in, but there's other moments where you kill all the guys, but then there's more guys and you have no option but to run, to hide, and to go back to being stealthy. So it kind of cops out a little bit every now and then. And to top things off, there's moments where it gets a little, I don't want to say unforgiving, but just unfair. I found myself touching a guard. I barely walked. I literally turned. I was blending, because you have an option to blend in by, putting your hands together and pretending to be a monk praying. I turned like a few degrees to the right, touched a guard, and instantly they pulled out their sword and said, "Kill him!" I was like, what's happening here? And this was more towards the end of the game, so I felt, okay, this is obviously a difficulty increase in order to make the game more challenging, harder, because obviously you're getting towards the end. But it reminded me an awful lot of Grand Theft Auto 4, where you would barely touch a police officer's car with your car, and boom, they turn on the sirens, you're in their wanted level, and then you gotta escape. It was almost the exact same scenario. And honestly, that just bugs me a lot, and I felt that it was something that was working against the game. But again, this was more towards the end, and it's kind of obvious that it's a difficulty increase to make the game more challenging, especially towards the end. But fortunately, it does feel rewarding to to get out of the way, to get away from the guards, to hide effectively, and to be able to pull off the assassinations, especially certain assassinations where you're not caught. The best assassinations are the ones where you're not caught. You kill somebody silently, you walk away like nothing happened, and nobody's the wiser. You get a true feeling of being a badass, and you get an even better feeling of being a badass more towards the end of this game. There's a certain point where you have to not even assassinate, but kill a slew of guys. This is where we get into combat. The game has this combat mechanics in which you mostly rely on heavy hitting, I don't want to say hack and slashing like God of War. It's very elegant, and you mostly towards the end of the game, you mostly rely on dodging and deflecting and counterattacks. And when you pull off a combination of dodges and counterattacks from one guy to another, trust me, it feels great. But as the game goes on, it does get more challenging, it gets harder, and it's all about precision and timing. You gotta be very skilled with the buttons that you're pressing. If you pull it off the right way at the right time, it is a spectacle to see, and like I said, it feels very rewarding and very just. And if a game makes you feel that way after slaying a bunch of guys and you being this one man, that's ultimately badass, and that's obviously a great thing. My only, major gripes about the game is that, again, going back to some of the story elements, again, the game cuts off right then and there. When the credits rolled, I was just flabbergasted. And again, going back to my joke at the beginning of the review, it doesn't make sense that this guy's wearing this, elaborate costume, and you expect to be blending in. I mean, granted, the closest thing that he blends in with are those monks that are dressed in white as well. But you could have picked a better outfit. So in that sense, it's a tiny little minor plot hole in the story's part. And going back to the gameplay, another element that this game relies on is that not only are you a stealthy and sneaky assassin, but you're also an acrobatic one. One of the elements that is incorporated into this game that has been passed on, that has become a whole thing all of its own, that when this thing is in a game, people automatically go, Assassin's Creed, and that's the acrobatic mechanics. Altair is skilled with the ability to scale almost any building as long as it's climbable, and be able to sprint and free run across rooftops and balance himself precisely on beams. And you use this to your advantage, not only to travel the cities way faster than before, but also to get away quicker after you pull off an assassination and you are caught by the guards. That way you can find a place to hide, a haystack or a little block in which you could just jump in there, and nobody notices you instantly when you jump into these haystacks, which is another thing that again kind of doesn't make sense, but it's a little more forgivable because of the fact that this is part of the gameplay. And when this does happen, you breathe a sigh of relief, especially after you have been running from these guards for however many minutes like I was doing. But that gameplay element, I thought, worked for the majority of the time. It gave me a sense of freedom, and it felt very dynamic. But there were certain moments where I felt it was a bit sticky. The game relies on you to be able to press the R1 button. At least, I'm playing this on PlayStation 3. So it relies on me to press the R1 button a lot. Pressing the R1 button makes all the difference in the gameplay. You press R1 and you switch between low profile and high profile. Low profile is obviously all the actions, all the things that you can do in order to be able to be discreet and as subtle as possible. When you're in high profile, that's when you can pull off all the assassinations, and that's when you sprint and you free run and you're faster and you're running instead of simply just walking, and you're doing all the more dynamic stuff. So obviously in order to be able to scale buildings, you need to be holding down R1, and there's certain moments where I was what I wanted to do is scale a building, but the freaking Altair would keep bouncing off, literally bouncing, jumping off the wall and jumping to another wall where I would, hey, guess what? I will land on a guard and the guard would be like, kill him! And I just got frustrated each and every single time this would happen. Granted, this was the first game, so maybe this is a little more polished in the sequels, but it is definitely one of the things that I did not like about this game is that it was a little sloppy when it came some of that parkour mechanics. And again, this is very scarce. It's not all the time. The majority of the time, the parkour worked. It made me feel like a true badass. Yeah, on top of how badass I felt when I was assassinating all those guys and pulling off all these kills with combat gameplay. But boy, did I feel like an idiot bouncing off from the literally off the walls and jumping onto beams and not being able to move to, not being able to jump to another gene just because I'm not high enough. It was frustrating. Overall, I really liked Assassin's Creed. The graphics still hold up to this day, even though there's some minor hiccups. The gameplay proceeds to become more and more enjoyable, despite the fact that it gets a little frustrating here and there. And the story becomes really intriguing and is paced very well, even though, again, like I said before, at the beginning it starts off a little unbalanced, but they both tie in very well as the game goes on. And even though the climax is very captivating, it is a little jarring to see it literally get cut off at a cliffhanger. But knowing that there are sequels, I can look past that. I give Assassin's Creed an 8.7 out of 10, which is a B+. Wouldn't mind playing the game again, but it's probably going to be a little while before I indulge myself into Ezio's story, and Connor's, and whoever that guy is in Assassin's Creed 4. Thank you guys for watching. For those of you who did play Assassin's Creed, what do you guys think of it? What do you guys think about why there is an Assassin's Creed game almost every single year? How long do you think the franchise is going to keep going? Be sure to follow me on Twitter at DarkSpiderDavid. Subscribe to my channel for more videos, and I'll see you guys next time.